Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. My name is Jamie, and I'm with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. And welcome to our fourth Tuesday webinar. In this particular webinar, we focus on a lot of our campaigns that are basically around data-informed policing, right? That's kind of the latest iteration of what used to be called predictive policing. So, and data-informed policing really is about encompassing all the different types of surveillance technology in what the coalition calls the architecture of surveillance, and how all those different types of technologies get operationalized into various programs. So today, we're particularly focusing on talking about all the different working groups that we have going in the coalition, what each of the working groups are focusing on, and sharing, all this work with folks to basically invite you into the fight, invite you into that collective knowledge building that we're doing, and help us, further these campaigns to basically win at dismantling LAPD in its entirety, but also to raise the alarm about the growing use of surveillance technology amongst police departments, and what that means for our communities, right? And I think what's so interesting about the coalition's analysis and our approach to this is really how kind of grounded it is in community. So we welcome you into our community space, and we're really thankful that you're here. So before we launch a little bit more, and I have a little bit more to say about today and what we're doing, I wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping. As you enter into our space, you'll notice that you are muted. And we do that only because a lot of the things that we talk about are controversial to some people. Some people are I don't know, white supremacists, violent by nature, not interested in the kind of liberatory politics that we're involved in. And we've been Zoom bombed before, where people have, just said obscene things. Some of our work is, in a sense, we do close solidarity work with the Palestinian youth movement. And so some of our members have been targeted. So it's like a security culture where we try to minimize the harm to our organizers, to our community that come in, and we try to mitigate that. So there will be time and space during the programming as we get going, where we will invite you to unmute yourself, and we'll allow that to happen. And we also encourage folks to use the chat. Right now, the chat will probably only be going to the moderators, which today is Hamid Khan and Tiff Guerra, who are moderating for us. And they can help to funnel in your questions as we're talking. So did I miss anything else, Hamid, in housekeeping?
No, and we are recording this, and this would be uploaded onto our website by this coming Friday or Saturday at the latest.
Cool. So so if you don't want to be recorded, and you want that privacy, just make sure maybe you change your name on your screen, keep your screen off, and then just be cautious in your chat share and your vocalizing, okay? So we want to make sure that everybody stays safe. Okay, so I think we're ready to go. And so we have a lot to share today, and I'm really excited because it's always kind of fun to check in with the community and kind of share. And this is what our webinars really are about, really about sharing what we're doing and where each working group is at in their work. It is in the working groups that we're more intimate. Sometimes there's less of us. Some working groups can get big, like up to 16 people. Some are smaller, 5 to 10, 3, 2, so we really try to create these collective spaces. And so I really kind of wanted to talk just for a minute about why I think the coalition is so special. And I've been a part of the coalition for about 10 years. And when I entered into the coalition, I definitely entered in knowing that I didn't like the police, and I, was very frustrated, and there was a lot of basic, that angst that I had, but I didn't quite know how to articulate it, and I didn't know what that meant, and my analysis and my politics were not as developed, and I'm just being honest and candid right now to really speak about the journey and what it means to be a grassroots organization. So the coalition is not a not for profit organization, nonprofit. I don't even know how to say them. A nonprofit organization. We are grassroots. There's only a couple paid organizers that have pretty much funded themselves by looking for grants and resources to uh, receive that pay, but most of us are volunteers. My day job is a nurse, and I've spent the last 10 years volunteering for the coalition. And so one of the things that's so special is that a lot of our work is not deadline driven. Responds to political moments, creates political crisis, but it's really about collective knowledge building. And that really happens through grassroots research, where we have folks that are not, necessarily traditional academics. Sometimes they are, but where the research is done and we bring it together within a community setting. And we really have collective analysis. Like sometimes, you meet those traditional academics, they're like, didn't we just discuss the same concept last time? And I'm like, well, like the community needs more time with the concept. And yeah, we're going to repeat the same conversation again this time. Because the point of it is to really build a culture of resistance, to build a space where you can be like, for example, like me coming in with very little knowledge of the national security police state, not understanding behavioral surveillance, not understanding what data mining was, and build that knowledge to resist. And that's what's most important. When we think about abolition being a journey, when we think about this being a multi-generational journey, it means that we don't want just people jumping on to a cause and signing a petition and showing up for a photo op. We want this to be about internal growth. We want this to be about your political analysis. We want to air what we think so that we can change and we can grow and we can thrive. So that's really important for me to share, because that's what today is about, is to really share like who we are, how we operate, what we're working on, and to really and this is the other thing, we love to talk as organizers all about our work. So you have to mind us if we go off, and I'm doing that right now. But we really want to share ways that you can plug in. What are the things that, we have that we need and that we want to build with people? And then also, if those aren't things you're good at, like how can we support you to get good at that, if that's what you want to do? Like I said, I was never like public speaking ever. And I used to tremble before every time in front of a police commission meeting. And it's amazing to see how you can grow. And, I really love this space because what it has provided, and what it provided not only for me, but for everybody to grow. So I will stop, going on my rant. I'm a healthcare provider, so I always love talking about growth and wellness. So I will move into, I think, basically starting to the presentation of our work. So I don't know if Tiff or Hamid, you wanted to add anything to that and why we're here today. And if not, we can get started with Hamid, but I want to make space for you all if you wanted to add anything.
I'm good. Tiff?
No, I'm good. Thanks so much.
Okay.
Sure. So I'm going to pass it to Hamid Khan. Hamid's our lead coordinator, and he's going to talk a little bit about some of the founding principles and things that kind of guide the coalition work.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Jamie. Thanks for setting up the tone. And I think this is so important, so critical that we always remind ourselves that what work we are doing, what was our point of entry, how we are building that knowledge, how we are building that power, and who we are building that power with. And, I see some folks on the screen as well who are also, movement builders doing some incredible work around the country. So for similarly, for the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, its origins are basically starting off, goes back a little over a decade, where some of us who've been involved in movement building and grassroots organizing in LA for at least 30 plus years, folks came together with a lot of concern that how rapidly these military-style tactics, which were being deployed during occupation, particularly counterinsurgency and counterterrorism tactics, were being rapidly incorporated into domestic policing. I mean, Jamie just talked about predictive policing. Predictive policing's origins lie in Iraq and Afghanistan. I mean, this was initially a grant from the Department of Defense that was given to some academics who claimed that they will be able to predict acts of insurgencies in occupation of Iraq and Afghanistan. And of course, there's a lot of pseudoscience and BS involved in that, so I'm not going to go into, because this was anthropologists and mathematicians looking at hunter-gatherers on the Tibetan Plateau and moving stones and all of that. So as anthropology has always been one of the tools of colonization, similarly, anthropology was now being used into 20th, 21st century occupation as well. So we started looking at what were some of the programs and how this national security police state was expanding, and how those tactics were being normalized. And I think it's really critical, because one of the ways that we want to talk about this is that, as I mentioned, counterinsurgency and counterterrorism. So then the question is that, who is considered an insurgent in the United States? Who is considered a domestic threat? Who is considered a threat? And of course, the whole narrative around terrorism, we've seen that, but that whole narrative of terrorism is a more recent development over the last 30, 40 years, particularly the terrorism as it relates to the language being used around for people from the Middle East or South Asia. And I remember Ronald Reagan, the jihadis and mujahideens and all of that stuff. But then insurgents and a threat to the system had always been there. I mean, this is how the Black community, the indigenous community, the migrant communities were always seen as the insurgents, always seen as the enemy, always seen as a threat. And then when you add more into the queer trans community, that how they were seen as a threat to the social fabric of the United States. So in a sense, the otherness was always there. So how are those others traced and tracked and monitored became something that we started looking at. So wanted to share a couple things with you, that this was one of the first things that we mapped out. We started mapping out the LAPD's architectural surveillance. And here I just want to throw a quick sort of a learning piece for us as well, that many a times surveillance is seen through the lens of invasion of privacy. But for us, it was really crucial that we need to pivot and we needed to shift the focus from the invasion of privacy and broaden that scope, almost kind of debunking it, that privacy by itself is a very narrow lens to use, because who even has privacy? And I know that a couple of the folks on the webinar today is also fighting against the violence against unhoused people and the unhoused communities around the country. So, I mean, and for us to be based out of Skid Row, how many communities historically have had that privacy? How many communities can even claim to have that privilege or a right to privacy as well? So we basically shifted the focus into that more than invasion of privacy, it is the intent to cause harm. It is the intent to cause harm and how surveillance and information gathering is used, that how race and poverty and suspect bodies and land is being policed, and how through the white gaze, through the white supremacist gaze, within a capitalist system which is rooted in settler colonialism and patriarchy, that how surveillance becomes the key to constantly monitor and track the other. So that was one thing. The other thing also I want to lift over here is that now, because of how technology is moving at such a fast pace, so the words surveillance technology have become really like one word, and we want to challenge that, because before there were stingrays, or how cell phones were being monitored, before there was license plate readers, or before there were drones, just infiltrators and informants and undercovers, human-based surveillance was always present, and human-based surveillance has always been the primary way to criminalize, to trace and track people, and to follow people, and to, and it's not only about phone tapping, about many years ago, but human-based surveillance remains the primary piece of that. And interestingly, just today, the LAPD was presenting its reform proposal as well, demanding more money. And now it's from, and we have busted undercovers in rallies and marches on camera as well. But now they're calling them shadow teams. So the legitimization of these actions and the legitimization of these processes is very much in play as well. So in a sense, we mapped out this whole architecture of surveillance of the Los Angeles, which includes both human-based and technology-based surveillance as well. And some of that, I wanted to show a couple pictures too, that when we talk about some of these tools, we also need to know what they look like and what is our fight. So if you folks have heard about Stingray, this is what a Stingray looks like. This is like a rectangular suitcase type box. And what Stingray is, that this was developed by the U.S. Navy and Marine Corps, and that it simulates and it mimics cell phone towers, and it triangulates. So all your cell phone information, instead of going to your provider's network, it is completely sort of rerouted into these boxes. This is digital receiver technology. This is freedom on the move. This is high definition cameras. This is a license plate reader. This is trap wire technology. Trap wire basically is used at night quite a bit, that it uses thermal energy to identify people and pick up and scan folks as they're walking down the street, body cameras and all of that. So the point here being that surveillance has become so pervasive that not that it was not before, but it's become the norm. I mean, it's just like the everyday sort of, just constantly tracking and tracing of people, and it does require a whole lot of understanding. But I'm going to take maybe a minute or so more just to show you that this is what we've been looking at. That the information sharing environment is such a vast apparatus that we call it the stalker state, and in which information is constantly moving between various public sectors, private sectors, law enforcement agencies, national intelligence, corporations, social media. So in a sense, when you're looking at this static Venn diagram, think of it as intersecting sort of circles where, and I'm forgetting exactly how Jamie once put it, but it's really the datification of our bodies. It's just how we have been, in a sense, that we get surprised when we are looking for and going shopping and looking for some tennis shoes or something, and next thing you realize that our favorite tennis shoes show up on the screen. So in essence, this is where the datification is going on. This is how our bodies have been completely mutated, I would say, into a gazillion molecular beings, and they're up for the pickings. A lot of money is made. I mean, Google wants a part of us. Facebook wants a part of us. Restaurants want a part of us. Where we go to watch movies. So in a sense, all our life is constantly being sort of datified in a sense. And I'll share one quick example of that. Just in a public sector agency, we released a report. I'm going to give a call out our comrade Ramshah Sajid, who did this report on a sort of a public sector agency, which you would think is just a safety net, the Department of Children and Family Services, a county agency, DCFS. But when you break it down, you start looking at this DCFS, their information sharing, and this report is, and I'll post a link, it's on our website as well. This is, I think, page 9 or page 10 of that 12-page report, that look at the scale of information sharing that is happening. Look at the scale, and even, for example, and some of the folks are here as well, that even in Skid Row, for example, when they're doing this very extensive intake for a coordinated entry system, that coordinated entry system becomes an extremely coercive tool, because they even ask you some of the most private information about, like, just your lovemaking habits, like how often do you have sex, or whether you have HIV or not, and various other things. And then, in a sense, where the backup to provide housing is not there, but the information has to be gathered as well. So we wanted to basically start off by sharing these things and of course we are only touching the surface. I mean, we're not going into the depth of how, people are being, individuals are being targeted as well with various types of radio wave and various types of technologies, which are really become a torture for people's lives as well, and harming people intentionally. So, but wanted to share this with you because our goal really is to broaden the understanding of this apparatus, broaden the understanding that and the scale and the depth of how information sharing environment works and how the stalker state works, but also what is our fight? How are we coming together with this knowledge in order to fight back? How are we fighting back with this information so we can stop this process that how people are being contained and controlled and criminalized in order to be traced and tracked and monitored and stalked with the intent to cause a lot of harm. So just wanted to throw that in there. And maybe what we'll do is we'll stop here. I'll stop there now, but
Ahmed, you muted yourself.
oh, I was just thinking, Jamie, so maybe we should open up the unmuting and see if people have any comments or questions, but also requesting that please don't Zoom bomb us. So if anybody has any thoughts about that chart, any questions and your interest, and because our goal is to really, I mean, try to recruit you, because as Jamie said, that 98% of our work is driven by volunteers and community members. So any comments, any questions?
Can I go first?
Yes, Jella, please. Good morning.
Good morning, Baba and Jamie. How are you all doing? And Tiff. Yeah, I think something I kind of dropped the ball with. I've been part of Stop LAPD Spying for a few years now. Well, quite a few years now. I'm not going to name them. Something that I kind of forgot that I said that I was interested in is the surveillance of the intersection of surveillance of people's bodies and rental house, like Section 8 housing. Yeah, like when you were saying around like how I don't know what you were mentioning, because I had a call, then I had to come back, and I just heard you talking about surveillance of our bodies when it came to like, they ask us how many sexual partners we have. They ask us, if we have HIV or AIDS or not, like that kind of shit. That happens here too. I think you've heard me talk about this, but like literally you are like, if you're houseless, you have to answer the same questions over and over and over. You answer them when you're trying to get your housing. You answer them when you're like in the government assistance programs like GR and SSI, and they're very fucking evasive. And it's like, what does this have to do with my disability? What does this have to do with me getting a home, getting livelihood? So I would love to start thinking about entering myself into that like portion of surveillance. I hope I'm making sense, y'all. I'm still a little doped up from painkillers. But yeah, I hope I made sense. Chill out.
Definitely, Chella. And I think this was because I've heard you also speak about this too, the coordinated entry system and all the applications and everything else, and how they really kind of almost, it's so coercive. And, I mean, rather than a public benefit, this becomes a criminalizing tool for people. So, yeah. Anybody else has any comments or questions?
I have a comment. This is Paul from RAP.
Hey, Paul.
And hey, brother. Like behavioral policing, as they fucking call it, is coming up in city after city after city. And I just wonder how much, and it's something that we're planning to look at, and maybe we hook up if you haven't already, but you may already done the shit. How much of this is the same companies? Because with the coordinated intake, it was 3 companies I was around that put a 3-line sentence into the Harth-McKinney Reauthorization Act at the federal level, and HMIS and then coordinated intake all came out of that. And those were the companies that were going around the country doing the fucking TA work and shit on how to implement their systems. And I'm seeing the beginning, not the beginning, but I'm seeing an increased trend of some of the, not the main broken windows guy, but some of the other fuckers behind him
Mhm.
talking about this behavioral policing model that all of the business improvement districts are pushing like fucking crazy at the
Right.
local level. And I'm just wondering how much of that you all have been seeing as it's spreading out.
All of it. I mean, that is central. And you talked about broken windows. So Bill Bratton, who launched Broken Windows in LA, Paul,
Yeah.
was the one who really brought in, because he's a big fan of Robert Peel, this English who used to be the prime minister and was a colonizer and the governor general of Ireland in the early 1800s. So he is very much into the British type of policing, and Britain was the one that launched what is known as intelligence-led policing, ILP. About 40 years ago in the Kent Constabulary. And the central piece of ILP, intelligence-led policing, was behavioral surveillance. And the main idea was that we surveil people's behavior and then we mine that data. So behavioral surveillance and data mining have become the two central tools and elements of surveillance of all kinds. So in a sense that they even developed a program which was actually our first fight for the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, was the Suspicious Activity Reporting Initiative. And Bill Bratton was the chief of LAPD at the time in 2008 when that was instituted. And in a sense, and this is how they define suspicious activity. This is things that you never forget. And I quote that the defined suspicious activity as, quote, observed behavior reasonably indicative of pre-operational planning of criminal and or terrorist activity. I'll repeat it again, observed behavior reasonably indicative of pre-operational planning. So now hunch-based and speculative policing has been legitimized where, when you talk to lawyers, they have no idea that what does it even mean? That observing somebody's behavior that indicates that somebody's thinking of doing something wrong. So absolutely, behavioral surveillance and data mining are very central to a lot of these policings. And Jamie, I know that you've talked a lot about that in predictive policing and other themes as well.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I want to lift in that is that we need to be really careful around the language of reform as well. For example, when Dante Wright was murdered in Minnesota, what was interesting is I was listening to an NPR special, and a representative that was on the safety committee was saying that that he wanted to pass this new bill that basically gave parameters of behaviors and activities that law enforcement can pull people over for. And one of the big things about data informed policing, which incorporates data mining and this behavioral surveillance that we're talking about, it's really a veneer of science to legitimize police basically intervention in our lives, right? Which we know is always violent, but what it does is it uses like science, technology, big algorithms, analytical, data processing machines, surveillance technology that, basically datifies you, whether it's your face, whether it's your license plate, whether if it's a gun that's being fired. And so when you think about behavioral surveillance, because in the program that Hamid spoke about in suspicious activity reporting, there were, I think, 16 behaviors, right, Hamid, that were deemed suspicious. So actual activities that they listed out, like these are the suspicious ones, and like photography, drawing, asking a business its hours of operations, those things allowed police to intervene and then say, okay, now I'm going to open up a report because you fit these particular behaviors. And so when we think about like how reform shows up, it's trying to like mitigate or limit or define or professionalize or make scientific police engagement. And that's really, really dangerous because it's legitimizing it. So even as this public safety or this representative was thinking they were doing something proactive or beneficial for the community, or whether or not, that was really the case, that was behavioral surveillance. He was basically saying, okay, I'm going to limit police to these behaviors, and then these behaviors are going to legitimize police engagement now. And that's why we can't be calling for like a kind of more refined, a more precise type of policing. It all has to go, because all its interventions are violent, regardless of how we look at them, and regardless of how they market them, regardless of how they sell them, or regardless of how they try to describe what they're doing. So that's one thing I think with behavioral surveillance that's really tricky. Have to really be on the lookout for, and understanding it as a core concept of where policing is going now is really important, because then we can like, oh, that's what it is right there. Like, he thinks he's reforming, but he's actually enhancing behavioral surveillance and data mining.
Great, thank you, Jamie. Anybody else has any comments? And one quick thing I would say was that when we talked about intelligence-led policing, the primary goal, and this is stated in their documentation, the primary goal was that they were using these methodologies and these tactics, and they said that for an outcome the agency wants to achieve. And if the outcome an agency wants to achieve is banishment, the outcome an agency wants to achieve is extreme violence. And I think we don't have to go too far back in recent, let's look at gang injunctions and gang databases. The outcome the agency wants to achieve was to criminalize Black and brown youth, to put them into these databases, to criminalize them from a very young age. And now similarly, that is being used, and there's actually this whole bogus bullshit science that is being thrown around, that they can now predict behavior, almost like making it from a womb to prison pipeline, from a cradle to prison pipeline. So that's the level of how these claims are being made. So yeah, Charles, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the general sort of question / comment I had is that in Greater LA or LA County, I think a major barrier to any kind of all-encompassing abolitionist program is just how many different agencies you have to deal with, the sort of overlapping jurisdictions, and also just like the border areas between areas of jurisdiction, so to speak. And of course the big elephant in the room here that is not LAPD is the LA Sheriff's Department, which sort of in my experience in the past year on the ground, both as a protester and as a legal observer for the NLG, seems in many ways to be the less restricted one in terms of the tactics that they deploy against sort of this overt and legible political activity that is direct actions in the streets. They come out with more and more deadly less lethal weapons with more visible shows of force typically, and on the whole they are just a larger agency as well, with sort of a broader remit. And of course in terms of the internal dynamics, we had this big expose by Cerise Castle for Knock LA recently about the deputy gangs, which of course we've known about for a while, and which speak to, I think, like an even lesser degree of accountability that LASD faces, because the fact that the sheriff is independently elected affords kind of like an alternate like power base or source of legitimacy. And with all of that dynamics, I guess I was just wondering, LAPD, of course, is in the name of the coalition. But, to what extent, I guess, does the scope of your work encompass, these other agencies, particularly LASD, with all of these sort of more unique features that I sort of just described that in some ways make it even less amenable to any form of remotely democratic oversight, to say nothing of a broader sort of abolitionist horizon.
Well, first of all, I want to apologize that my chat just went to everyone. It was for Jamie to see, like, I'll ask one more question and see if somebody else, because I was supposed to pass it on to Jamie for the next piece. But yeah, no, thank you for that question, Charles. I mean, I think that we absolutely, it's not just our work, while it focuses and the primary target of our organizing is LAPD, and when we first started, but we have organized very proactively. We were the ones who basically forced the sheriff and the oversight body of the sheriff to vote against the use of drones by the sheriff's department in 2017, and basically the sheriff told them to fuck off, and still continued, and there was a 5-4 vote. We've been organizing. There was a Long Beach Police Department, various other police departments. So between the sheriffs and the LAPD, there's almost this competition between who's going to be the most murderous police department. So to your point, we focus on the LAPD, and by examining and investigating and exposing the LAPD, almost kind of showing a model that what exists and how this violence is being exported both locally, regionally, nationally, internationally. I mean, we have been talking to, just about next week, we have a call potentially with folks in Netherlands who are reaching out from Europe as well. We talk to a lot of folks around the United States. We've been talking to folks in different cities about the role of the community-oriented policing section, the COPS office, and the funding that they're giving. So yeah, in a sense, to summarize this, that while the focus is on LAPD, but using this as an example of what law enforcement does, and this is the second or the third largest police department in the country, and which takes up all the resources. But and I think it's also important to note that the LAPD has a bandwidth which is global in nature. The LAPD exports its violence not only locally, but also internationally as well. For example, in the 1980s, the LAPD trained El Salvadorian paramilitary squads. It's all documented, right? It's in Christian Williams, The Other Side of Coin, going into details about that. The LAPD had Marine Corps individuals in the early 2000s, 70 of them assigned to them, that were patrolling the streets of South Central Los Angeles to see how LAPD was policing the hood, right? Which then they deployed in Anbar province as well. So these are all like in effect, so that's the model that we're using. But to your point, absolutely, this is about everybody. Thank you. Okay, Jamie, now I'm going to pass it on to you.
So cool. And, there's so much to say about that. I think that, this is a model, not only a model of organizing, but understanding that like even post 9/11, the fact that the idea of information sharing and changing the culture of police departments and police agencies, sharing information and no longer having competitive departments, but sharing information, creating information exchanges through databases, and being the eyes and ears of the federal government, right? That was the kind of post 9/11 change. So what you see that LAPD is doing, be sure to know that the sheriff's department is doing it as well, because there are functional standards being developed. There is even the way that crime data is being collected through the uniform reporting crime system is being changed so that law enforcement can collect more data at crime scenes. So they're ramping up, federally to be able to create larger databases so that more data can be stored, and that analytical machines like the records management system, like we hear about Palantir, are correlating, aggregating data at faster rates. So it may not be perfect right now, and everybody may not have the exact system, but that's the goal. And that's where they're reaching. So what's important is that our models are reflecting each other, that we're not, in some senses, like LAPD's had an oversight commission since the 1920s. So the idea of democratically controlling police is like a completely old concept that somehow we keep banging our heads against the wall thinking that that is going to be a solution, right? And that's why like sharing strategies and understanding legacies of policing is really important, because we may be pushing for a strategy that in another city, they did it 100 years ago and nothing changed. So what's the point of even pursuing that strategy, right? So these are some things why it's really important for us to link up, for us to understand each other's fights in each city, because policing is a national thing, it's international, and they all use the same kind of tactics and reasoning for why they can intervene with violence. So what I wanted to do was now kind of move into what some of our working groups are doing and what some campaigns are, but I'm going to make it I'm going to go kind of fast because I'm not going to I don't want to lecture, but I want to kind of talk about, show some maps and just speak briefly of projects we're working on and a lot of what, where you can plug in, like what is your skill or what do you want to learn? So I'm going to kind of start down the trajectory of talking about predictive policing. And so I'm going to screen share right now and bring us into, oh wait, before I screen share, I'm going to find the thing that I want to share really quick. Hold on one second. Technology. Okay. So, okay. And I'm going to just kind of share a little bit about what the coalition was doing in its predictive policing fight. So, so LAPD started, like I said, there's the architecture of surveillance and there's all these different types of technology tools, right? Whether it's automatic license plate reader, shot spotters, facial recognition technology, whether they're using analytical tools for information sharing like Palantir, records management systems, and whether they're using various or other analytical tools like ArcGIS to aggregate data, right? It's all about how much data can I get and what can I make it say? And exactly to Hamid's point, it's about what does the agency want to achieve? So they de-aggregate our stories, right? And then they re-aggregate us through the lens of criminality, right? So part of the coalition always knew about predictive policing. And these are some maps from predictive policing, from a predictive policing program. And we started our official campaign against predictive policing in 2016. And so during that time, we were fighting to dismantle Operation Laser, which stands for LA Strategic Extraction and Restoration, and for PredPol. Laser used a risk assessment and PredPol used an algorithm. So we basically started this campaign in what is now called the Freedom Room of LA CAD, but it was their new office. It was concrete walls, and I remember a couple lights, and we were just in this room reading an article together and being what is predictive policing, right? And we coined it right then and there. It was what did we call this science? Help me out. We called it
one of the Skid Row residents, yes, is Craig. We called it pseudoscience.
Pseudoscience, yeah. So, and so it was it's the same old policing, just with the veneer of science. So pseudoscience to mask the violence. So, so through that campaign, and I'm just going to move real quick. We, used the police commission to create tension around the fact that they weren't talking about this program. It had been in effect for almost 10 years, and they hadn't really made it known to the community that they were using algorithms, that they were collecting massive amounts of data, that they were using risk assessment, that people were being put on secret lists as, chronic offenders, potentially going to commit a crime but hadn't yet committed a crime in front of LAPD, or was it wanted? That they were using algorithms that were telling police where to go into, different hotspots. So we were raising this issue in the police commission, right? Constantly talking about data and constantly talking about predictive policing. So we were creating trouble there, right? And just kind of blowing some of their minds because the commissioners didn't even know. And then at the same time, we were writing a community-based report. At the same time, we were doing focus groups in the community about if they knew what predictive policing was, what they thought of predictive policing, what it felt like to be policed, what it felt like for the community to be policed. And then simultaneously, we were filing public records requests, trying to obtain more information about predictive policing. So all these things together really led to a very strong movement in the community. And we were able to resist and dismantle LAPD's first generation of predictive policing programs. And so from that, like I said, we were able to obtain, we used the California Public Records Act to obtain information about these programs from LAPD. And one particular public records request that we wrote, and mind you, we didn't hire lawyers to do this. And like I said, we were grassroots. we really try to build collective knowledge in the group about how to proceed in doing things. You know, we may partner with academics and lawyers, you know, from time to time, and they may be a part of the group as community organizers, which everyone's welcome, everyone's a part of the community. But the point is to build the skill, is to demystify these tactics and realize that we can build that knowledge in ourselves and also act as individual agents if we don't have a lawyer with us, if we don't, you know, have an academic at our side. But the point is for that collective knowledge building. So we obtained some of these documents, and this is actually a document which was called a mission sheet that we obtained from LAPD. And here you can see, and I'm going to use my pointer and maybe you can see it. These were what their laser zones were. So Operation Laser had a component of it that was called laser zones, anchor points that were like these micro hotspots, and chronic offenders that they were targeting, right? And and the anchor points, they used a geographical mapping program called ArcGIS to kind of compile data to figure out, you know, where their hotspots were. So here you can see there's, I think, 6 laser zones, and there's these rectangular squares. And so they would basically police these areas more, looking for particular people. Sometimes they had descriptions, sometimes they had license plate. And so these, you know, and particularly the Metro Division was using this program to stalk people. So they didn't even have to patrol a beat. They could just go out and go into these zones and look for people too that were on the list. This is an example of another thing we got out of a public records request around predpol, and these were predpol hotspots. So they used the algorithm called predpol that was developed with some professors from UCLA and UCI. And they basically use that algorithm based on reported crime data to select places for cops to patrol. And you can see these squares, right? And, you know, I want to demystify this a little bit too, because something that came out of this is that we realized that LAPD was like really this veneer of science, like with the laser program and the chronic offenders, these people they put on lists to track that they thought would possibly commit a crime. They were hardly using the risk assessment to do it. We have hundreds of people that we found out that had 0 points who were still being targeted. Predpol, for example, when you look at the actual math, and we broke down the algorithm ourselves, working with mathematicians and statisticians and those kinds of folks, and they're like, everywhere is going to be a hotspot. It just depends on which spot is the hottest. And really, the crime analysts, and we even got documentation, are allowed to manipulate the graphs. So they can really just put together whatever kind of graph they want, you know, that, you know, even if there's a hotspot here or a hotspot here, they can be like, oh no, we want you to patrol this particular hotspot. So we really have to kind of demystify this science, this veneer of science they're trying to use, because it all can be subjective and it all can be altered by LAPD, which we found out it was. So I'm going to really talk now about the analyzing these maps. So we dismantled this program, but then we started to want to analyze them, right? And like, well, what was going on in these spaces? And in this community knowledge building space, we came up with this kind of new idea around predictive policing, not just being about, and this was the big hype in 2016. Everybody was like, oh, it just sends police back to the same spot and it creates this feedback loop. And that's all that everybody was saying, feedback loop. Well, in our discussions, we started to realize something more was going on in the mapping and policing of land. And so we mapped anchor points, and these are some of the anchor points. And like I said, the anchor points were a part of the Operation Laser program, and anchor points were like the micro hotspots, right? And this particular spot, this is Crenshaw Boulevard and Slauson. And this was actually, we came to find out that Nipsey Hussle's store, the Marathon store, was actually a part of Operation Laser. The corner was an anchor point, and it was actually a laser zone as well, right? And there was a whole story that came out regarding how the city was trying to use the nuisance abatement program to evict them, right? So now we started to see how these programs were actually correlating to land grabs, to the city trying to evict and abate people from properties, right? And so, so we started to kind of build this analysis around policing of land, that it wasn't really, that it wasn't just, and that's what I mean, the policing of people and that ratchet effect of going after people and terrorizing people, arresting people, murdering people, but it was also about targeting land. And so this was a density map that some mappers that didn't all know how to map, and they like learned how to use, it's called, God, I can't remember the mapping program is called.
ArcGIS or?
No, not ArcGIS. This is the one that our mappers used. Something with the C, it's called Cardo. And Cardo. And some folks ended up like being sociologists, and they started to map by hand all the different laser zones from 2015 to 2017. So like folks learned how to map and on Cardo. And so we found like these density areas where laser zones were, right? And so this team started to analyze what was going on. And what they realized was they put these laser zones, these basically repeating laser zones, on the LA index of displacement pressure. And this was a displacement index that the housing rights activists really fought really hard for in LA City. I don't know if it's, yeah, I think it's just the city. And so you can see, this is the area Slauson and Crenshaw right here. And that's where Nipsey Hussle spot was at, right? That I told you was a laser zone and an anchor point, right? And this is where we started to realize the Crenshaw Metro line, and that actually this whole area was being targeted. And if you look right here, it has a very high displacement pressure point. So this is where people are being moved and displaced, really, right? And so in these other spots, we realized, like if you look down to the bottom right of 77th Division, and this, I'm sorry, I didn't explain, but this is where 77th Division is, or 77th area, where LAPD patrols. And you can see there's kind of a high displacement index here as well, definitely higher than it is here and up here as well. So there's another, so like I said, we had the first working groups that dismantled this first generation of predictive policing programs, of LAPD's predictive policing programs. And now we have this other working group that's really working on analyzing what happened there. And that's through that community conversation and like analysis and community-based research, we've come up with a new report that we're going to be releasing soon about the policing of land, and looking at how these programs actually were being in partnership with the city to remove people from their properties, whether through abatement or through eviction or through just the terrorizing of people around their space. Now, these are anchor points in downtown, right? And we know downtown's being gentrified. And so these particular anchor points right here, this is near single room occupancy hotels that are in the new gentrifying area. So they're actively being targeted by police, right? Where senior lead officers are walking around those areas, police are patrolling those areas. This part right here on Maple Street and 7th, which is pretty much down into the heart of Skid Row, is where a new luxury high-rise is being built. So again, this whole thing around policing of land. And this is actually a map of density hotspots from the predpol algorithm. So when we were looking at that, we knew that this was all the downtown area that was being policed, right? And there were so many predpol hotspots here, right? Because it's all about reported crime. So who's calling the police? All the new gentrifiers are, right? And this area right here with the blank spots is actually where Skid Row is. So the ratchet effect wasn't really operating in its true nature for predpol. What was happening here, and as we talked to our partners in LA CAN, was in this spot, LAPD had its own other program called Reset, which is an extension of the Safer Cities initiative, where they actually had 50 particular officers deployed just to the Skid Row area to police here. So not only was Skid Row dealing with its own force of police officers coming in, but they were also being highly tracked when they went into the downtown Skid Row area. So putting it all together, this is where you saw Laser and Predpol working together to deal with or to police downtown. And so I'm going to end with saying real quick and move us back here, is that what's interesting in the new 2040 plan for Skid Row, the rezoning they want to do, where they only want to build affordable housing east of San Pedro, is all these areas where the anchor points are, especially on 5th, 6th, and 7th Street, are the areas that they want like market rate competition going on. And when we looked at the laser zones, the proposed laser zones that we ended up stopping, they're all in this area right here. So 2018, LA announces its 2040 plan to basically gentrify this area and squeeze out Skid Row. 2018, LAPD had laser zones planned directly for this area as well. So I'm gonna just show one more thing and then open up for questions and tell you how you can plug in. So this group is kind of like in this mode of analyzing, let me see, I have to get out of this, that's what I gotta do. Oh, well, actually, I'll just show this real quick. These were the proposed laser zones. Can you guys see this? People see the Central Division laser zones, Ahmed?
No, there is no screen share, so you need to put the.
Sorry, I understand how to use technology. Okay, so here they are, right here. So these are the actual proposed laser zones for Skid Row for 2018. San Pedro's right here, so they're right in the heart of Skid Row, where the 2018 plan wants to, basically clear out. So we dismantled those. So what did LAPD do, right? So LAPD moves into a new program called data-informed community-focused policing, right? And so basically, like I said, we have to be really cautious about reform, because once we exposed the harm of all these programs and what they were doing, and we got them dismantled, like I said, LAPD was using them arbitrarily. We exposed them in a hearing. We had a public hearing in City Hall. We had a lawsuit going where that we successfully won, and we got people's names released. They were like, okay, there's all this pressure, so we're going to reform our surveillance technology programs. And so they called it data-informed community-focused policing. So I'm not going to get too much into the details of what this program is, but this is what we're working on dismantling now, what we call LAPD's second generation predictive policing programs. So, and this program basically has an offender-based component. It has location-based hotspot policing. It has community policing, crime prevention through environmental design. It is talking about the expansion of data analytics centers into actual neighborhoods now, where they have like centers that are processing the data that's being collected. And they're still using Palantir, automatic license plate readers, and all this stuff. But they're saying the biggest addition here is the community policing component of it and the partnership they claim they're making with police. So, so really, our group around predictive policing, like dismantled first generation, is in the process of analyzing the impact of the first generation. So that group is called, is a working group that meets the first Monday of the month at 6 p.m. And we call ourselves like, analyzing the policing of land, working on a report. And the report's just about finished. And the third Monday of the month at 6 p.m., a group is together looking at data-informed community-focused policing, understanding that it's not just the policing and terrorizing of people, but it's really about the targeting and policing of land, so that city officials and real estate owners can target areas with the partnership of police and actually remove people from there using things like nuisance abatements and evictions. So that crew meets Mondays at 6 p.m. And so what we're really looking for is basically ways that we can do presentations to groups like housing groups to kind of share about this. We're currently trying to build like a PowerPoint and pop-ed to share this knowledge. So if you're part of a working group or you know someone that might be interested in that, that would be really great. We're developing a website for our report so that people can toggle through it, leave comments about the report. We're also filing more public records requests. And so definitely if people are interested in learning about that component of how to file one, how to go through all the documents when you get them, definitely want to keep building that knowledge. And let's see, I had my list of things that oh, and graphic designers. We really want to get in touch with, especially Tongva graphic designers for our policing of land report, because we have been definitely building with different members of the Tongva community to just kind of learn more about what does it mean, like when we say land and we think about settler colonialism, we think about the policing of land. So we're also looking for graphic artists as well to help us kind of bring to life not only the maps we have, like the ones I showed, but just imagery that helps to speak to that struggle. And, you know, the liberatory work we're doing to, you know, reclaim ourselves and create community on this in Los Angeles, on this land that is Tongva land. And so, yeah, so that's what that group is doing. And I'm telling you, it's just been an amazing journey to not only understand these various technologies that are being used, but really to like, it's been a year that we've been researching like land and policing. And sometimes people are like, didn't we go over this concept already? And I'm like, well, dude, we got to revisit it. You know, like this is how we all learn and this is how we're able to share. And this is how we become empowered to be able to speak about it. Right. So like I said, I'm going to put the times for this land and policing or policing of land working group and the working group that's looking to dismantle the second generation predictive policing programs here. If you can, shoot me your email in the chat and I can get you looped in, even have a one-to-one to kind of like show you what's going on in those working groups. So, so thanks. And I'm going to pass it back to Tiff and Hamid.
Thank you, Jamie. This was great. Just want to open it up to see if folks have any questions, any comments. They want to join the fight, sign up. So, any comments about what you just saw? Because it's interesting that you know, just how when we think of these things, it is also we get caught up into, you know, the mode of what is the tactic, what is the technology, what is the action that the police is taking that is on hand. But when we start really kind of digging deeper, then a different sort of an ecology opens up, and in that ecology and that landscape, and we actually have created you know, what we call the algorithmic ecology, that if we decenter pred pol from policing directly itself and we start looking at all the interest groups that surround it, it's a pretty vast ecology. You start looking at the complicity of the academy, that how the academia is deeply complicit, how the federal government is involved, how corporations are involved, what is the role of the city government in this thing, what is the role of these supposedly civilian oversight commissions, how complicit they are. And then, so what is that collective impact on the community? That it's not just about, you know, just the criminalization and the daily harassment, but it's really about looting and banishment of people in that land grab that is happening. So yeah. Anybody has any thoughts, any questions, any comments on what you just saw? Charles, feel free to say if you have if you wanted to.
Yeah, I don't want to take up too much space.
There's no limit in making comments, so please.
Appreciate it. Yeah, I guess I was really fascinated by the focus on Skid Row in the second part of your presentation, Jamie, because of course we have this recent ruling by Judge Carter, essentially ordering the city to clear Skid Row. Right? It's couched in the language of offering housing to everybody, but we all know, and I think it's explicitly stated that after a certain percentage has been offered housing, then the policing regime is gonna turn even more overtly towards elimination. So I guess the sort of questions I had about that were like, do you expect LAPD to essentially take these plans sort of off the back burner or modify them in some way to accommodate this much accelerated timescale for this, and also what lessons do you think they will draw and we should draw as well from what happened at Echo Park Lake about a month ago?
Well, I think one thing that's really important about what this judge is trying to do is really take us back in time to the Safer Cities Initiative, where literally when that program was rolled out in the early 2000s, they literally just lined people up in the street and were arresting, massive arrests were happening. And Los Angeles Community Action Network, their work really details what was going on then and the fight and the direct fight they were doing to end that program. But what they're doing now, and this is what the data-informed community-focused policing working group is looking at, is that they have established things that are called area crime community intelligence centers, within each area or division of LAPD. And these data analytics centers basically create like mission sheets and kind of like target areas using what's called the SARA model, right? Because they're trying to make scientific and they're trying to professionalize what they're doing, right? And SARA just stands for scan, analyze, respond, or scan, analyze, respond, and assess their like intervention in a space. And they target areas that they call neighborhood engagement areas, NEAs. And that targeting happens by senior lead officers literally walking the beat, checking in with predominantly business owners and real estate, or like managers of apartment complexes, and finding and looking for basically quality of life crimes, like what broken windows would police. And so from there, once they target an area, they come up with an actual intervention. And these interventions are actually now being discussed at the police commission. And so now we're thinking like, oh hell, they've started the NEA process. Let's file a public records request and let's see what areas they're targeting, right? So definitely they, I'm sure, have identified neighborhood engagement areas, and look at the reform language, like engagement area, right? Area crime community intelligence centers, right? And they are identifying places. One thing that we learned through our deep partnership with Steve Diaz at LA Can was that senior lead officers also for redeveloping or for real estate developments, or when they're building a building, actually have to, with the architects and with the real estate owners, do a walkthrough of the building to make it easier to police, basically saying, these are where we want the cameras, these are how we want the hedges. And the police have to sign off on the development and what it looks like, right? So that's how involved police are in the planning of space and in the targeting of space. So I think the biggest thing right now is really sharing and exposing that not only did we know in 2018 that they were going to directly target Skid Row, that we believe that they still are targeting Skid Row through data-informed community-focused policing, not only going after people, which we found when we got the list of chronic offenders, when we sued LAPD for that list, when we didn't get everybody, but there was about quarter of them that were people that didn't have addresses. So we assumed that they could have been from the Skid Row community, or I'm sorry, we assumed that they could have been people that didn't have homes, unhoused people. So not only did a large portion of those folks in the list were unhoused, but then we also saw that they were directly targeting Skid Row and this huge development fight that's going on, and this basically targeting of or this revisiting of mass arrests and clearing of people. So yeah, so that's where this group is now moving, but that's exactly to the point where we want to be talking with our housing partners and being like, yo, tell us, like, what does this mean to you and how do we keep building?
I think Dejanay, did you have a comment, or I know you made just put that comment in there for 90 days, but anything in relation to the Carter's decision? And I know you've done a lot of research in Skid Row as well. Any thoughts you have?
Hey, no, not really. I've been just reading the the motion, and I'm just really the motion really recriminalizes folks in Skid Row and makes them seem as folks in Skid Row as a threat to health and safety, which is like the legal auspices in which an injunction can be filed and approved, right? So they use, like, I just want to say that they use like a lot of racial thinking to be like, we need to help Black folks on Skid Row, all to then say, this place is a heavily crime area and a severe threat to health as well. And, you know, just concerning in that it's to do it within the next three months. Although folks have, including the city, and I saw LA Can appeal this injunction, so we'll see how that process goes. But even the solutions, right, that they say are like temporary or temporary shelter, emergency shelter, or permanent, right? And it just is clear that this is urban planning as policing. This isn't, and you know, it's like LA Can fought so hard for the last couple decades to stop policing. You can even see in the motion, they're like, oh, the police haven't been able to touch Skid Row. But it's like, you don't even mention like the fight of folks in Skid Row. And then saying, and this is a moral panic and we need to do it. And we need the power of land, urban land permits, that we need to steamroll eminent everything to do it. So it's crazy, and that this is led by business, folks that LA Can have been fighting against for the last few decades. And the larger scheme of it is that these downtown elites lost this fight that led to the containment policy. They lost against West Side elites in Wilshire and Santa Monica and Venice to develop the city, and now downtown is hot. And they're really trying to get rid of Skid Row. And so, I don't know, just kind of, yeah. And I hope to participate going forward with the third Mondays as the semester closes on this. So, yeah.
Cool.
Thank you, Dejanay. Any other thoughts, comments about, because this is really critical, that how the facade of public safety and fighting crime really is an underhanded way to remove people. Mamta, do you have any thoughts about, from your experiences up in the Bay Area, you know, similar fights around unhoused folks and the various injunctions?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's exactly right. There are, you can almost map out the same practices, the same philosophies. There are just a lot of parallels between what is happening in a lot of these cities. The rhetoric is a little bit different depending on what people think are the sensibilities of the local population, you know. So, but yeah, I mean, I think also community policing is just, it's so sinister. It's really focused on sort of co-opting local communities into, you know, this under the guise of safety and and you know, violence intervention. They even call it harm reduction, you know. So I think, yeah, there are just there's so many parallels, and there are so many ways in which we can sort of understand this based on local context, but the overall structure remains the same, I think.
Thank you. Thank you, Mamta. Carly, you had a comment about wanting to turn the city into a special enforcement zones. Do you want to talk about that over a little bit?
Sure. It's just everything that, like, all of this is connected. I think the city builds these special enforcement zones around every shelter they create, which the goal is to bring more policing and criminalization to communities. And that's the plan for every shelter they're putting up. We're seeing, targeted sweeps, more police contact, and like in our observing in these areas, like we've seen more people incarcerated than housed. So that's really what this is about, and the way that they use, things like coordinated entry systems to collect information and then work pretty openly and collaboratively with LAPD. Whether that's really important for us to understand the relationships and how LAPD is part of anything that's a city service. There's LAPD has a contract and that's something we're all fighting against. But one thing we've noticed is these shelters are being built near metro stations. So the zones, they call them special enforcement and cleaning zones. They added the cleaning part later to make them seem nicer and that they were like a service, but really it's about enforcement and bringing more LAPD. But as they're being built, we're seeing them around every metro station. So in Canoga Park in North Hollywood, downtown LA, I believe the city is planning to have every metro stop as a special enforcement zone, and the goal is banishment cases so they can further develop them. So just hearing from the research and work you've done, this seems like the second round, their new strategy is to basically make the city a special enforcement zone in all of these areas where unhoused people have long-term communities, have lived there for decades, all over the city. So yeah, that's something I would love to just get more involved in and map out, or however we can share research and strategies and fight this upcoming battle that's really just meant, as others have said, just meant to criminalize unhoused people.
Thank you. Absolutely. Absolutely. Cool. Anybody else has any thoughts before we move on? Good. Tiff, can I pass it on to you?
Yeah. Thanks so much, Hamid. So I believe next we're going to talk about community policing. So the community policing, this is one of the working groups that does fall under our data-driven policing umbrella. And Hamid, did you actually want to talk a little bit more about community policing in general?
Sure. So yeah, because that term is being, we're talking about it, it's an integral part of policing. But this term is obviously nothing new. We've seen this term in one way or another from community policing, community-oriented policing, community this policing. been thrown around over the last 40, 50 years. But in essence, and in a very, blatant way or direct way, this is a tactic that basically has been derived from occupation and occupying armies, that how occupying armies control the local populations, and how occupying armies infiltrate local populations, how occupying armies go into, which is being done right now. So the model of community policing is very much rooted in Vietnam, and how occupation was happening, and how supposedly relationships were being built with community folks in various parts of the country. So similarly, what we see is that how local neighborhoods or cities, when the U.S. Army goes in, how they identify some local leaders, how they do their intelligence gathering. They would find out that, okay, well, in this case, in Iraq or Afghanistan, whether it's a church leader or a mosque leader or a Gurdwara leader, who would be willing to be a part of, kind of rubbing shoulders in return to offer them security and also resources as well. So a lot of coercion has gone into this thing. How then local communities are identified. Then within that, whether it's a local school teacher or local business people, how snitching begins and how people become embedded. So it's a process in a way that is being used by law enforcement for many years in the United States as well. And now it is very much being advanced very rapidly because there's a lot of money being poured in. And we saw that 21st century plan that the President Obama floated back in 2015 or so, 2014, 2015, where community policing was central. That how police will go in, and now exactly what we see, that these are actual bureaus that have been created, which was interesting that in response last year to the massive uprisings that have been going on, and one of the largest movements and social movements in the history of the world, that LAPD came back and they created this Community Safety Partnership Bureau. Community Safety Partnership is a partnership that, in a sense, this tactical operation was launched in public housing projects in Jordan Downs and Nickerson Garden back in 2010 with at least four public housing projects, and then now it's expanded. And the claim there is that police will go in and build that partnership with with local residents in a public housing project, where they would also provide safe passage to children, because the claim is that how community is being demonized, that it's a gang-ridden, crime-ridden area. So they're going to provide safe passages to kids in school. It's also, in a sense, who would also be embedded in the local community as well, to identify some of the local folks who are residents by providing them some more resources that who can be informants in the police. They also what they do is that they go in and actually TIFF and all had mapped this out, I believe in Jordan Downs, in a sense where crime prevention through environmental design, which is another tactic that law enforcement uses, where they would completely, it's almost like a clear cutting of green spaces in the neighborhoods. And that's what we see, why Skid Row is all, just pavement, why South Central Los Angeles, you don't see a whole lot of green spaces. Like, you just go west on 3rd Street, you just go past Crenshaw, and all of a sudden you're into these leafy neighborhoods. But no, that's not going to happen on the south side or the east side, because they want to have a panopticon effect. They want to have a complete 360-degree surveillance. So community policing is a very coercive methodology, and I'll stop there by saying that that it is shameful that rather than investing in enhancing the human conditions, rather than investing in providing resources to the community, here you have that you're holding the community hostage because they're dependent on housing. So going into public housing projects, but in return, it also becomes this forced quid pro quo that you have to be an informant and you have to be a snitch. And that's exactly what occupying armies do. Otherwise, you're going to get entrapped. Otherwise, you're going to get shot. Otherwise, you're going to get murdered by the state, or you're going to be criminalized, or you're going to be daily harassed, or you're going to be intimidated and threatened. So that's the baseline. I mean, I'm just kind of doing a very rough sort of an overview. But yeah, so thank you, Tiff, for doing that. And I know you're going to talk about the working group that we have.
Yeah, thanks so much, Hamid, for that background. Yeah, so and again, the way the community policing fits into data-informed community-focused policing, which is that workbook that Jamie was talking about earlier on, and kind of this is the latest version of LAPD's data-informed policing. The way that the community policing fits in there is they're pretty much having that same cycle that we've always seen of profiling folks, gathering information on folks, doing an analysis of the data, sending out, using different types of policing tactics on folks, and then there's this cycle of like profiling, surveillance, and criminalization and incarceration. So we're seeing all of that still, but then we're seeing this element of community being added into that. So what we're seeing is, instead of just having, as Jamie was showing us, the anchor points on the map and talking about how LAPD used to look at a community and say, these are the areas that we're going to patrol, these are the areas we're going to heavily surveil. What they've started doing now is they've said, okay, we're actually going to meet with folks in the community. We're going to identify those folks in the community that have expressed interest in making positive changes in their community and these types of things. So LAPD is selecting who are those community members that are willing to work with police, and then kind of pulling them in under the guise of we're working with community, and then saying, oh, we're creating these plans together, and we're identifying these neighborhood engagement areas together. So as I said, it's kind of the same cycle that we've always seen, but now everything is kind of being done under the guise of the community is also a part of this. And that's happening, I believe, right up to the level of that they are even trying to have community members, of course, selected community stakeholders, selected community members, come and join them in their comp stat reviews, where they actually like go into these report rooms and they kind of do an analysis on what's going on in the area and look at the numbers and kind of crunch the information and talk about, is this plan working? So they're really trying to kind of bring community in quotes, kind of at all these different levels. At least that is kind of how it's been described to us so far. And in our working group, we're very much in the process right now of kind of uncovering, what does this process look like? What does we always see with LAPD? There's always what they describe, what they tell us is going on, and then there's always, of course, what is actually going on. So we're very much interested in, like, what is the structure? What is the process? How are folks? Who are these selected members of community? Kind of what that whole process looks like. So part of, in the community policing, just one of the things that the community policing working group is doing is to kind of learn more about that process, also to learn more about what are the ways that folks are having information gathered on them through these community safety partnership sites, through community policing programs, such as the Safe Passage, whereby cops are walking kids home from school or to school. Like, what types of information is being gathered on these kids? How are people selected for this? Like, how are specific youth selected for this? So, like, we understand that whatever LAPD is doing in the community, there's going to be this element of surveillance, of data gathering, of infiltration going on. So with these specific community safety partnerships and their community programs, so-called, what we're interested in uncovering is what is that data information gathering going on, and then also learning more about, like, what is the harm, like, how is this actually impacting folks? So those are some of the things that we're kind of working to uncover. The group is in the process now of putting together a PRA to be getting more information. So yeah, some of the things that group would be looking for would be folks who are interested in doing research. So of course, this doesn't have to be folks that are local to LA. It can be online research or folks who are interested in reading documents, folks who are able to kind of generate art or graphics or create popular education materials. And I'll pause there and see, Hamid, you're also part of that group. Is there anything you can think of in terms of what else might be a way for folks to be plugging into that group?
Yeah, I think there's a lot going on. I think what started off as almost kind of looking at it that as community policing being a part of data-informed community-focused policing, this handbook or this operation that LAPD launched in April of 2020 last year on the heels of dismantling predictive policing. But I think what has turned into now is really kind of looking at it through an abolitionist lens, and that framework, and how are we engaging, and what is the deep insidious nature of community policing, and what is the facade of reform that drives it? What is the language of reform that drives it? Because it seems on the face of it, when you think of community policing, it is presented as this very benign relationship building, a trust building. Just like that cops are going to be playing basketball with the kids. Cops are going to be walking them to school. So in a sense, what is also very interesting in this whole narrative is that the same resources that are being spent by paying these cops overtime and hundreds and thousands of dollars of salaries. I mean, if you were to, and this was something I want to go back to giving kudos to Youth Justice Coalition several years ago, who came up with that 5% campaign, that even if we take 5%, now there's abolition and defunding, but YJC and the youth were saying that 10 years ago, that even if we take 5% of law enforcement budget, the county law enforcement, that comes to over $100 million when you look at the sheriff's department, when you look at the LAPD, when you look at about 48 other law enforcement agencies in Los Angeles County, and that by itself can easily provide jobs to 25,000 youth, that can easily provide 500 youth, create 500 youth centers, that can easily provide, rather than the city-driven gang reduction program, that can easily provide, employment to people who can be de-escalation folks and can really be so in a sense, that's one of the ways that the group is looking at that. How do we debunk a lot of this on the surface story that is thrown around as very reformist and kind of trust building?
Thanks, Hamid. And if folks are interested in joining this working group, I guess the best way would be to send an email to stoplapdspying@gmail.com. And we can loop folks into that. I believe the group meets about every 2 weeks right now. And also just want to pause and see if folks have any questions about that, or perhaps any any experiences or any experiences with CSP or any knowledge of that they'd like to share. Okay. Okay, so next, I think the working group that we're going to be talking about next is the budget, the defund surveillance campaign, and that is something that is a fight that is done in collaboration with our partners, the free radicals. And Hamid, did you want to, as someone who has been a longtime member of that campaign, did you want to describe that campaign a little bit?
Sure. So last year in June or early July, a group of us came together, and yes, there was definitely on the heels of and taking the lead from the people's budget and stuff that Black Lives Matter and K-Town for All and some of the groups were involved into looking at the city's budget and demanding a reduction in that. What we started doing was in our partnership with Free Radicals or Free Rads. This is a group of young, STEM students, science, technology, and engineering, mathematics, and various other disciplines as well, who really are on the front lines of decolonizing a lot of this language as well. So we were actively involved in actually the link that I posted, algorithmic ecology. That whole algorithmic ecology was developed in partnership with Free Radicals in a way to map out that what does that landscape look like around these algorithms. So since surveillance was our primary lane, and by lane I see that we've been organizing around, we felt that that we need to really start looking at the tools of harm, which may not have a big ticket in the budget scheme of things, but yet at the same time their harm is extensive, their harm is vast. One example I can give is Palantir technology, which was developed by the CIA. And this Department of Defense now is proliferated into law enforcement agencies and public sector and private corporations as well. Palantir, a corporation that was started by Peter Thiel, who's a close associate of Donald Trump, in partnership with the CIA, that is being used by the city of Los Angeles, how Palantir was central to the chronic offender program, creating of the chronic offender list, of targeting individuals, just in their lives, how Palantir has been central to the mass deportation, because ICE uses Palantir quite a bit as well. And the stalker state, the graph that I showed you all, that how Palantir is central into processing this system. So these are the types of technologies where they may be worth about $3 million or $2 million a year, but yet at the same time, their harm is huge. So that's what led to developing this defund surveillance. And obviously, as abolitionists, for us, it's not just about shifting of monies, because abolition, policing of the body is happening, in every sector as well. But yet at the same time, the idea was that how do we starve the beast? How do we initially work towards starving the beast, where you start taking away the tools that lead to extreme harm to our communities, that lead to the mapping of harm and targeting of communities as well. So that led to this whole campaign about defund surveillance, which is something that we've been building with our with folks in with Free Rads, and I'm just going to open it up, the website that we have. We came up with a whole set of demands, and this is and this is the website. So it's defundsurveillance.org, where we put together the background and our demands out there, and our demands being that to disarm all weapons of surveillance from the LAPD, and all LAPD siphoning of funds and data from other city departments, and all federal spending on LAPD, abolish the Community Safety Partnership Program, abolish LAPD's propaganda units. I mean, this LAPD's own communication department has 40 people which are getting paid. There's this whole police commission, how do we abolish that? And the tech industry and academic collaboration and complicity. So this is a campaign that if folks want to go, and I'll post this link as well. And then as a part of this thing, we filed a public records lawsuit as this budget period was starting out, because we wanted to find out that what are the documents that they use, where is the base budget, how do they arrive at this point that they want $3.2 billion. So we filed this public records lawsuit in 2021. And what's really interesting is that the city attorney is fighting us on this lawsuit, because on one hand they're saying, well, we don't have the documents, but on the other hand they're saying, well, the documents that we do have are exempted. Well, why are they exempted? They're about your profit. They're kind of like a profit and loss statement. And if it's a publicly funded organization, then they should be made available to people. So, so we kind of launched this lawsuit as well, and using this political litigation in order to weaponize public records, to basically, get more information so we can go after them and expose that. And then last Tuesday, we got together and we looked at just in the same vein as algorithmic ecology, and this was just done by hand. This was on sharing screen, and Sophie Wong, who's one of our comrades at Free Rad, was kind of facilitating this thing. So we started looking at, so this is the old sort of a chart for algorithmic ecology. You started looking at the Palantir ecology, that what all surrounds us. And the idea behind this is that we should know our fight, that what are the pressure points, that how many people have their fingers in the pot, and what are the different pressure points. So for example, in the predictive policing fight, when we mapped out algorithmic ecology, the academy really showed up quite a bit, because a lot of these things are developed by UCLA and UCI and various other universities. So that became a fight by itself, that how are we going after the academics? What is that academic complicity? So similarly, in this case as well, we have been mapping all of this. So it's it's a long fight. Abolition is a multi-generational journey, and right now we are looking at Palantir and various other technologies and facial recognition technologies. That what is our fight, that we basically ban them and prohibit them, and not a ban like the ACLU type ban that it has various kind of loopholes in it, but really a solid airtight ban, where we've been using the analogy of facial recognition and some of these in the same way as people think of chemical weapons. People think of other extreme weapons of harm, because in essence, these technologies are a tool of harm. So Tiff, that's basically the defund surveillance campaign that we've been working on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hamid. And we also want to raise that there is actually a call to action that some folks may have seen that was sent out this week. And so regarding the LAPD budget, the City Council's Budget Committee has actually scheduled a hearing for LAPD's budget this Thursday, which is the 29th at 9 a.m. This came up on very short notice, which seems to be the way that these things do occur. You know, as Hamid mentioned, it's kind of this whole process by which the budget gets approved and reviewed, and it's very much like shrouded in secrecy. And so something that has been a part of the campaign has been to find out what are those intervention points, what are the points that the public can comment on this and can push back. So again, this Thursday, there is an opportunity for folks to submit public comment. The meeting is at 9 a.m., but then, and Hamid, correct me if I'm reading this right, I'm just looking at the information that we've shared, and it looks like public comment will be available again on the 5th. Is that correct, at 9 a.m.?
Yes, it's actually the 6th, which is a Thursday.
Okay.
6th, which is a Thursday of next month of May, and although they're going to be and I'm going to look for the toolkit and post that link in chat, so folks can go on there, so they can submit public comments. And there's also recommended public comments as well, because today some of us were able to make that public comment at the budget hearing. So right now it's in the Budget and Finance Committee, but let me look for that tool and I'll post it in there too. But you can definitely speak to the committee on May 6th. But even before that, you can also send the comment in writing as well.
Awesome, thanks so much. And the toolkit that Hamid will share will be information about how folks can make public comment, information about the meeting, and also contains some talking points, some more information about what that actual agenda item is. And then for the budget fight, ways to plug into that would be that we are still looking for folks who are interested in that working group. Especially, it's very much about like reading through documents, often kind of very long and tedious, and that kind of documentation. But so kind of chasing down documents from different city departments, filing PRAs, looking up information about, what specific items are, kind of tracking how things have been funded over time. So just a lot of kind of investigative and research and that type of thing, which I know doesn't appeal to everybody, but there are some folks that would appeal to. So definitely, if that's the type of thing that you like to do, we have like just little small ways that people can get involved, like little small lookups or information pieces that we're looking for. Or folks can kind of, be involved to the level that they would like as well, and are able to be. And then of course, again, it's like about creating pop-ed, sharing information on social media. So there are numerous ways to be plugging in, also to be sharing information with folks that you may have in your circles, in different spaces. So if you are interested in getting involved in that defund surveillance campaign, definitely get in touch with us and we will loop you into that group as well. There is the toolkit. Thanks so much. And then I'm aware it is 7:49. We just had one more fight that we wanted to describe, and that was about facial recognition. And so our fight against facial recognition, folks may be a little bit familiar with it. It actually started kind of back in 2019 when we started filing a PRA with LAPD demanding information about their use of facial recognition technology. Again, it was very much a secret, like much of what they do. And while we were actually demanding that information and waiting on those documents to be returned, which they were not doing, it was actually revealed and exposed by the LA Times that LAPD had been using this technology. And over the course of the summer of 2020, they were actually using the technology specifically on protesters, people who were protesting police violence, and that they had actually used it over 30,000 times. And so what this led to, kind of the public outrage and pushback on that the fact that this was happening, what that led to is that in December, the end of the year 2020, LAPD announced that they would be establishing a policy, of course, which is how they do things. They think it'll be okay if they establish a policy around it. So they said, well, okay, we'll put a policy in place. Clearly that was the problem. And they took that to the Board of Police Commission. They put it on the agenda. They opened up public comment around it. And the coalition very much rallied in response to this and shared a lot of information about, what are the harms of facial recognition technology and looking at the ways that it is used. It's not just, they like to call it a method of identifying folks or just kind of a lookup tool. So they try to kind of minimize the way it's used and the harm. And actually, we were able to kind of talk more about how it's actually used as a tool of surveillance, because it's actually it can be used to track a person. It can be used to, like, if you're able to identify a person through an image and use facial recognition on that image, then you also have information about that person's location, the time of day they were there, who they may have been with. So of course, it's all part of LAPD's architecture of surveillance and the way that folks are tracked and surveilled. And of course, it will be used predominantly against the Black and Brown community. So we did kind of share information about that. We had a call to action. We did submit a lot of public comment demanding that this technology be shut down, that it not be used. And we did actually have, I think, about 60 organizations sign on to a letter that we shared demanding that this not be used by LAPD. They did go ahead and pass that policy, which wasn't a complete surprise, but we are continuing to push for a ban on that technology. Most recently, the sheriff has who have been using it for years. They've been using it, gosh, I think since at least 2012, the sheriff has been using the technology. And that recently came up at a meeting, and I think it was just a week ago. And so, yeah, it was to the Board of Supervisors, their public safety cluster meeting. Actually, the Sheriff's Department gave a presentation regarding their use of facial recognition. And so that was an opportunity for us to call into the meeting and to again be demanding a ban and to be talking about the fact that we have absolutely no way of knowing how this is used and calling out the harm, demanding a ban. So we did again kind of put together a toolkit on that, share some information. And I'm not sure if anyone here was in attendance to that meeting, but it was just a very, as can be expected, just a very terrible presentation that had a lot of misinformation. And so that presentation was made, and that was to the Board of Supervisors. And the coalition, of course, is still continuing to pursue a ban on facial recognition and to be kind of looking for organizations to sign on to that as well. And I'll just pause here for a moment and just see if perhaps anyone here was in attendance at that meeting, or if anyone has questions on that type of technology or anything that I've just shared about so far. Okay, all right. Yeah, so essentially, that is part of our fight as well, is this shutdown of facial recognition technology. It is part of the architecture of surveillance, as we've named. It is part of what we are fighting to disband. But more than that, we are also fighting against the ideology behind it, that which would suggest that surveillance and the people being tracked actually increases community safety. We know it does not. So that is something else that the coalition is working on. And if folks are interested in joining that fight, again, if anyone is interested in doing research into the way that the technology is used, in understanding more about the impact of that, which is something that we really don't have a good deal of understanding at a local level right now. Again, helping create popular education, or being able to share information about these types of strategies, being able to mobilize folks or create information to share when these things come up as an agenda item on a meeting. So those are some of the ways that folks could support that particular fight. It is an exciting one because we are kind of seeing at a national and global level that there is some pushback on the use of facial recognition technology. Some cities have successfully banned the technology. And so it's definitely something that we're going to be continuing to push for. And yeah, that was the last working group that we are going to be covering at this meeting today. And I will just pause again to see if anyone has any questions, any further questions about that. Okay, and I will pass it back to Hamid or Jamie.
Back to Jamie.
Back to me. Okay, so this is what we do. And this is how busy we stay. So yeah, so we covered a lot. And just to kind of repeat, I think if Hamid and Tiff, if you could put some of the standing meetings in the chat so people know when the standing meetings are. We got a couple minutes and people can see when those standing meetings are. We talked about a lot. We talked about land and policing, or policing of land. We talked about data-informed community-focused policing, Palantir, the LAPD budget and how to defund surveillance. We talked about facial recognition technology. And we didn't even get into like our writing and our working group around pushing back against surveillance ordinances. Maybe we did, I don't know. I don't think we did. So there's like so much that we do, and it's really exciting, right? And there's a lot of ways to plug in and so many ways to grow and to, build that analysis and share that information and help it inform your own fight. If you're like working in housing, if you're involved in other things, and, policing, like I think a lot of people were even discussing here, is ever present in the multiple systems that we exist in, right? So it's important for us to realize that it's not just rooting it out of itself. It's not just abolishing the police, but it's really like about looking at carceral tech in housing, in healthcare, in all these social services that we're actually trying to fund. So having this analysis is super important, and it helps us kind of have a mirror for how to find it, within our own fights, you know, what those are and how to really, what does abolition, you know, mean, and how do we recreating the world that we want. So thanks, Hamid, for posting. These are our webinars. We look at the intersection of gender and sexuality and surveillance on the first Tuesday. The second Tuesday we call our War on Youth, where we predominantly focus on police and how police engage with youth and those different fights. The third Tuesday, we always kind of have a special meeting and, you know, various things going on. The fourth Tuesday, like I said, we talk about data-driven policing, which entails like all these fights that you just heard. And then you can also tune into YouTube and go to our YouTube channel, and you can check out all our webinars. We've been doing webinars since the shutdown happened in March, or since the declaration of the pandemic. So I think this is it. It's 7:59. So I really appreciate everybody's time, and you know, it's always fun for us to create space where we can talk about this. We can be in community, and we can really like lift each other up, you know, and really realize that we can, you know, we can make it, you know, and we can understand this stuff, and we can, like I always say, figure out where it is, and we can break it. Because I think if you don't know what it is, you don't know how to break it. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to dismantle all this technology. So I am good to go, and I hope that you are good to go. Hamid or Tiff, did you have anything else to add, or does anybody have any announcements?
No, I'm good. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Just appreciate everybody's presence and sharing. So thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Tiff. And we'll look forward to seeing folks next Tuesday. Have a good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Take care.